Dear friends in Christ, today we celebrate the feast of the dedication of the Lateran Basilica, the mother of all churches in the whole world, and of course the churches in Rome. In our gospel passage today, we see how Jesus ascended into the temple in Jerusalem and began to chase people out in what we call the cleansing of the temple. This is one event recorded by all the four gospel writers. Among the synoptic writers, we understand that Jesus may have cleansed the temple because of the unethical practices of the vendors. Those who were selling and buying in the temple. When you look at the account given by St. John, you understand that Jesus had to clean the temple basically because of the presence of the vendors and the money changers. Because Jesus categorically said to them, "Stop turning my Father's house into a marketplace." This is the first time that Jesus referred to God as his Father in the Gospel according to St. John. If you look at the response or the challenge that the Jews are going to give to Jesus in verse 18, they failed to pick up this particular statement by Jesus. But remember also that when you look at the synoptic Gospel writers, this cleansing of the temple comes towards the end of the life of Jesus. And this is one of the reasons why Jesus experienced crucifixion. But in the Gospel according to St. John, he puts it in the beginning of the ministry or the mission of Christ. There's a reason for that. And there's a reason also why John began this Gospel passage. John chapter 2 verse 13. From verse 13, John tells us that it was in the time of Passover. If you remember the story or the event of the Passover from the book of Exodus chapter 12 and chapter 13, you remember clearly that that event of the Passover reminds us of the deliverance, the freedom that God granted to his people, the Israelites, when they were slaves in the land of Egypt. This Passover is not just a passivity, like God just passing over, the angel just passing over. No, but that Passover is in two ways. Passing over, not entering their rooms to kill any of their firstborn sons, as we see in the families of the Egyptians. But he passes over, not killing, but stays there to watch over them. So it's in two ways. To pass over, not entering to kill, but the presence of the divine was there to protect the Israelites. Now, the connection to this cleansing of the temple is that the Passover speaks to us about deliverance, freedom that God granted to his people. When Jesus entered the temple, he saw a lot of corruption. He saw a lot of exploitation. He saw that the temple was filled with all kinds of atrocities. And that's why he began to clean up the temple. The action of the cleaning of the temple is a gift of freedom. That's what it means. That the same freedom that God granted to his people in the Passover, the same freedom that Jesus grants to his people again. So this is like a renewal of what God did in the Old Testament, granting his people the Passover, the movement from that slavery, the movement from the land of Egypt. Jesus comes today, cleaning the temple, giving us a new opportunity to begin afresh, setting us free from the spirit of corruption, from the spirit of cheating, from the spirit of exploitation, because that was what was going on in the temple. You may also understand that many of the Jews were living in diaspora, and every adult Jew was expected to offer an animal. If you are well-to-do, you can offer a lamb, a ram. But if you don't have money, a poor person is allowed to offer pigeons or turtle doves. Now, many of them were coming from Egypt. They were coming from Rome, and it was a far distance. There was no airplane, there was no taxi. So if they will get an animal as they are coming, the animal will automatically either it dies or it becomes blemished. And you cannot use a blemished animal for sacrifice. Every animal that must be used must be unblemished. So that's why they had to buy the animals. But that's not the issue. The issue is that the prices were made double. So that was like cheating and exploitation, even inside the temple. This was what Jesus was reacting to. Again, the money changers also, those of them who were coming from Rome, they had coins that had the head of Caesar. And to offer to God the coin that has the head of Caesar was an insult to the monotheistic orientation of the Jews. So they had to change the money. They cannot use the money that was profane or money for idols to offer to God. So they had to change the money, but that's not the problem. The problem was that the money changers were also exploiting the people. These were the things that Jesus was reacting to. For you to understand the connection between this cleansing and the gift of deliverance, which is also connected to the Passover, the word that John uses to throw out is the same word actually used for exorcism, which means that when you exorcise someone, what are you doing? You are giving the person the gift of deliverance. And deliverance is liberation. Liberation is freedom. If you look at the response of Jesus, you will notice a sort of twist in his response when they asked him for the authority he had to clean up the temple. In the beginning of this passage from verse 13, Jesus was using the word hiero, which means the physical temple, the complex, the structural temple. But there was a movement from that hiero to naon. That naon in Greek refers to the inner sanctuary. So Jesus was talking about himself. He was talking about his body. Remember that this gospel was written after the resurrection of Christ. And that was why, even at this moment when Jesus was using these words, both the Jews, that's the religious leaders, and his own disciples did not understand what he was talking about. But he was talking about his body. He was talking about his paschal mystery, his crucifixion, his death, and his resurrection. The basic reason why Jesus did this cleansing was to restore the reverence that should be in the temple. The temple is the symbol or the presence of God among his people. And people were failing to recognize this divine presence. And that was why there was so many acts of irreverence to God. So Jesus' cleansing of the temple was to restore this consciousness of reverence for God. And this one thing we should also ask ourselves is, do I still possess this disposition to reverence God in myself, to reverence God in other people? Because all of us, lahat mga tao, every person is the image of God. So do we still reverence that presence of God in other persons as the image of God, as the imago Dei? That's the first thing we see from the cleansing of this temple, the restoration of the reverence of God. And by extension, the way we show reverence to God is through our respect for one another. The second lesson which I would like us to reflect on is the courage of Jesus to confront the ills of the society. If you look at what John tells us today, you understand that Jesus was not confronted by anyone, which means or which suggests that there are so many people who did not like what was going on in the temple, but they could not voice it out. They could not say anything. But Jesus is the only one who stepped up, who stepped out, who broke the silence, who challenged the status quo. So this is very important for us to understand this, that as Christians, as disciples, as followers of Christ, we must step out. We must condemn whatever is evil, especially when it concerns things like oppressing the human person, suppressing the human person, exploiting the human person, marginalizing the human person. Everything that will hurt or will destroy or will affect the image of God, which is the human person, we must stand up to it and we must voice it out. We must say no to any kind of exploitation or abuse that concerns every human person. That's one thing we see that in what Jesus did today. We have to step out. We have to really call it out. We have to really say no to any action that dehumanizes the human person. Of course, the second reading today reminds us that we are all the temples of God. I think we have to really clean up ourselves. We have to really make sure that God dwells in us. If our heart or our life has become a marketplace is a place that is so noisy, so smelly, so dirty. So if we have all these qualities of the marketplace, I think today is the right day for us to go towards God. In John chapter 20 from verse 21 to 23, Jesus has given us the opportunity and the way to reconcile with God and come back to Him, so that our heart, our life will no longer become a marketplace, but a dwelling place for God, a place of encounter between us and the divine. And when we have this encounter inside us, then we will fulfill what we see in the first reading today from the prophecy of Ezekiel. Our life becomes a healing balm to the people that encounter us. Because if we allow God to influence us, if we allow God to prompt our thoughts, our words, our actions, any person, any human being we encounter, we will give life to the person. We will encourage the person. We will bring healing to the person. And that's what it means really to become real temples of God. Because the presence of God brings healing. The presence of God brings joy. It brings happiness. It brings confidence. It brings every good thing that we can think about. That's what it means to really be the temple of God. And that's why Jesus has come to set us free from the powers of darkness, from every demonic pagination, from everything that is stopping us from being truly the temples of God. That is our Passover. That is our deliverance. That's our freedom, and that is our liberation. God bless you.